the Big 12 Sports Psychology Group, and we have sports psych practitioners from Oklahoma State, University of Texas, and West Virginia University. And I am Dr. Matt Johnson from Texas Christian University. I am a licensed professional counselor and a certified mental performance consultant. So before we start our discussion today, I'll have each of our members introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Dr. Cody Commander. I'm the Director of Sports Psychology at the University of Oklahoma. I'm a licensed clinical and sports psychologist.
Hello, I'm Dr. Trevor Richardson. I'm also a licensed psychologist. I'm the director here at Oklahoma State for counseling and sports psychology.
I'm Kylie Humans from the University of Texas, and I am a licensed master of social work.
And I'm Dr. Dana Charbonneau. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I am the director of clinical and sports psychology here at West Virginia University.
So I want to start off with our first question. So after completing a first full semester with the COVID pandemic, which started back in March 2020, what's your sense of the mindset of the spring sport college athletes here as we start the spring semester, again, here January 2021?
I just had a meeting yesterday with one of the spring athletes, and the mindset that was demonstrated in my office was just a really heavy feeling. And when we started talking about it, it was, one thing last spring when it was interrupted and we just kind of scrambled and got done with things. And then going into the fall semester, our discussion was, okay, we know we're gonna have to do some more stuff, but we're not quite sure. And the restrictions started to ramp up throughout the fall semester. And so then, everybody made it through that. It was a stressful semester. But when this student athlete was talking to me, that sense of heaviness was, okay, now it's almost like informed consent. We know what we're in for here, and we know it's going to be a long, tough semester, and we don't know, from one week to next if we're going to get to compete. So there is a sense of, yeah, I know I can do it, and I know it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, I got to chat with one of our spring teams yesterday, and there were two kind of coinciding attitudes. One is just the concern of it being canceled again, and they already lived through that once. So just what does that reality look like? But then another of their teammates kind of mentioned, then let's just play every game like it's our last, because we could have this one canceled or this one changed. That's, just the reframe of how they want to step into this season.
So really right on to, in sports psychology, what we talk about is one game at a time. So literally the theme of one game at a time, because it may not literally have another game.
Yeah, that individual variation part with our individual student athletes, but also the individual team context is just interesting, right? How there might be multiple different experiences or holding multiple emotions there at once. And I have also met with a lot of student athletes and teams that are just excited. Like, we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like from day to day, but we have been training through fall and now came back early from break to get ready for this season. And so I just want to get in there and just want to get out there and compete again and see what it feels like, see what it looks like. So that's also been an interesting kind of perspective to hear as well.
Yeah, and I think also recognizing how much of a team sport life is. So I've had athletes talk about how, they may be lower on the roster than their roommate. And so they're not wanting to go out because they don't want to jeopardize their roommates' playing abilities as well. And so kind of recognizing how if they get infected, how it's going to affect the rest of the team. Then also on the opposite side, those who are playing, getting upset with those who are going out and engaging in risky behaviors and jeopardizing the rest of the team. And if they're going to play next week because of their off the court, off the field kind of behaviors too. So it's also changed the dynamics in which how the players interact with each other too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Do you guys have more thoughts on that, or to expand on just the dynamics and maybe of what they have learned from, you know, the fall sport athletes and interacting with them, and some of those team dynamics about, you know, higher risk behaviors and then players being unable to practice because of the COVID protocol?
Well, I think one of my fears would be, especially this ends up lasting a long time, is it becoming kind of strategic in a way for those athletes who are wanting to retire, but aren't ready to utter those words out of their mouth, that this is kind of their way out, is to have a positive and not have to train or come back or things like that. There's also been times where people have, I wouldn't say intentionally kind of put themselves in jeopardy, but for one reason or another didn't want to play and figured if, you know, if the rest of the team got it, then fine, we're not going to do well anyway. Might as well, you know, it's kind of our way out of being able to compete because the rest of the team is gone. So almost like I feel like the longer this goes, it's going to be part of the competitive strategy too. And I mean, we see it with the football playoffs, like, okay, who's playing today? That's going to change, you know, who's favorite to win the game and things like that too. So
Right.
Now it's not just about who's the best team out there, but it's who are the best players on the roster eligible to play today. And so that's going to change all the dynamics of watching film. And, you know, well, this person has competed for 3 weeks. You have to watch film from a month ago, like, because who knows if they're going to be playing today. And so it's just changed the way that everyone functions from the ground up.
Yeah, and I can speak to even athletes. So, right, some athletes are both kind of a fall and a spring sport. Maybe, you know, swimming, diving, for example. Those that cross over, even like track, to a certain degree. You know, those who have to qualify, and they have less competitions to do that, or maybe they only have one competition left. Normally they would have about 3 competitions to be able to qualify, get, you know, for zones. Now they have only one. So again, that mindset can really shift to, you know, that kind of all or nothing, like I have to get it, or if I don't, then, you know, my season's over. And on top of that, that can be at the conference championship. So I have to do it at the conference championship. And again, if I don't, then we'll come back to this, but, you know, maybe we'll talk a little bit later about some things, you know, that we do in our work with athletes to kind of help them with that mindset. I also wanted to ask about the fall sport athletes who have finished their seasons. What do you think their mindset is? Because certainly their playing season might be over, but, you know, they have spring seasons coming up. I'm thinking of volleyball, for example, and you know, football. What are your thoughts about what their mindset is after having gone through a season of dealing with COVID, and now it's not in season per se, but, you know, they're still going to be training and having a spring practice season?
I've heard a couple of different perspectives. Like, a lot of folks just like were welcoming a break and an extended break. But then it was interesting that some athletes were itching to get back to structure, even if it felt like so much structure in the fall with the bubble and everything. We know our athletes are just used to that. And so kind of ready to itching to get back, even if it's just training wise. But I've also heard perspective from other student athletes, like wondering like what coaches' expectations are going to be for the spring, just from a training perspective. And like, just knowing like if they had an extended break and like not knowing, I guess, where their athletes are going to be at physically and technically when they get back, and like is training going to be harder than we're used to in the spring, or what that's going to look like. So there's almost a little bit of anxiety there with, yeah, just knowing what it's going to look like compared to maybe a couple spring semesters ago. So
Yeah.
I think some are relieved that it's over, because it increases the intensity of training when you're having to do so with so much structure and worry about getting COVID and family members getting COVID. And so now there's almost like an exhale, and they're able to see family that they maybe not have seen since May or June since they started training. So I think there's kind of a mixture of responses with that. I think some kind of like what Dana was saying are ready to kind of get back to that structure kind of alleviates that anxiety for them too. My worry is that now that it's over, that they're going to be engaging in more risky behaviors because they may not, they may have more flexibility in their schedules these next month or so before they start off-season type of stuff too. So my kind of worry for them health-wise is kind of when they all come back to start retraining again, how many of them are going to have unhealthy consequences of their behaviors this past month or so.
Right, and along those lines, I think there's some uncertainty as far as, okay, in the off season, how strict are those guidelines going to be on us as far as what we can do? Because through the fall semester, they got to see their family very, very little. And so even, I'm not talking, going out to the bars and all that type of stuff, they're still going to be frowned on doing that. But as far as even just going home to visit family, they're wondering, okay, are we going to have more freedom to do that this semester since it's in the off season and we don't have to worry about competitions, but we still need to worry about that greater good of keeping our bubble, our team, our teammates safe. So balance is the word that keeps coming back to mind. And it's so tough to find that balance when there's so much uncertainty in all the questions that we ask.
Yeah. So this team sport bubble has been something that's been used throughout, at least collegiate and professional sports. The idea that you need to, you can socialize amongst each other and kind of have a bubble, so to prevent getting the COVID virus. What are the positives and the challenges that you have seen with the team sport bubble for your athletes?
As far as positives go, it gives them, I think with all the uncertainty, it's been helpful to have some clarity in certain places. And so when it's the bubble kind of gives some, even if they're strict, some guidelines sometimes to like, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, cool. And it just, if they know what's expected of them, one less thing to worry about. On the other hand, and I've noticed this especially for freshmen, is coming in, being in that sports bubble, meeting someone outside of athletics is like impossible. And so from a social and like college experience perspective, I think it's had, in my opinion, maybe the most impact on newcomers to campus because of the restriction that it's had on their freedom.
Yeah, and I would follow it up with, you mentioned freshmen and newcomers, transfers, especially because many of them didn't hardly even know the coach. So maybe freshmen even had a little bit more kind of recruiting time with a coach, maybe not, but, having transferred in, and feeling like I don't even know the coach and I don't have time to really get to know the coach because we have very little interaction time outside of sport because we're on Zoom or on our in a room, and same thing, with teammates. So yeah, definitely challenging and impactful to, mental health and feelings of connection.
I think it's different with every team, obviously, but with some teams from a positive perspective, since there hasn't been as much of an opportunity to break off and meet other folks and everything, it has provided an opportunity to maybe even improve team cohesion amongst themselves if they've invested more time and energy in being creative off the bat, especially for the new athletes coming in and trying to kind of build up that team cohesion sooner than later. So I have seen that happen too, but we know at the same time, sometimes you get sick of your family. So there's also the double-edged sword part of that. But that's been kind of cool to see and kind of helping facilitate some of that team cohesion with some of our teams sooner than later when they do have more time together, if they can expand outside.
Great point.
Back on that, I've also seen multiple teams that have gone beyond our dynamics with the team and started to talk more about social justice issues and ways they can get involved, whether it be through social media, things like that they can do now. So, I've seen some student athletes really take that and run with it, that okay, we have, less time to be out and about doing things. So they've done some of these other more proactive, and in social justice is one area where we've seen a lot of that. So.
Yeah, good point. Great points. So looking towards this spring semester, at this point, COVID vaccinations have now been part of our society in terms of first responders getting vaccinations. That's been the first line of focus, and perhaps the healthcare providers at your school have already gotten their vaccinations, and the plan is everybody needs to get 2 vaccinations, the first one and then the second one, somewhere in between 2 weeks and 3 or 4 weeks, get their second shot. So how do you see that playing a role for this spring sport athletes? And again, I don't know on your campus what the word is in terms of when vaccinations will be out for the student population and the staff and faculty population.
I think it comes back to a lot of uncertainty, because some of the conversations I've had are along the lines of, okay, after I get this, is everything back to normal? And if you look at the literature, no, we're still supposed to mask. We're still supposed to social distance. It's not just going to be, I get a shot and then the next day I can, prance around wherever I want to. And so it comes back to, I've heard a lot of confusion about it. I've heard some that are reluctant about getting it. And, what I'll always do is, I recommend you talk to the medical professionals and get some more understanding, talk to your trainers, talk to our head of sports medicine, look at the CDC guidelines, things like that. And so I encourage education and some of that education, not just getting it spoon fed from, wherever, but then it just gets back to, okay, when this happens, what's next? And it's not just going to be we snap our fingers and everyone can go back to life just how it was. It's going to be a general transition. So I find difficulty of wanting to be excited and then talk about things getting better, all that type of stuff, while also reinforcing realistic expectations about it kind of tapering back down and not just everything stops all at once.
Good point.
And there may not be a lot of flexibility in when you get scheduled to take it. So it's almost like, hey, we have these on Wednesday. You have to come get them on Wednesday. And the follow-up shots can be the similar way. So what's going to be, what I've heard with more staff than student athletes talk about is the side effects, especially from that second shot, that seems to be a little bit more severe than the first shot. I can only imagine if your second shot is scheduled, the day before a pretty big competition, you're most likely not going to be feeling your best on the day of competition. So it'd be nice to be able to have that second shot on like a bye week or something like that, so you can not jeopardize how well you play in performance. But I don't know if the luxury is going to be there to be able to schedule around competitions, and that would just add to the complexity of scheduling for everybody else too.
Great point. Yeah. So the timing of it can make a big difference. So let me throw that out to you guys. If you're working with an athlete who has that situation, or a team that has that situation, what do you tell them?
Well, I mean, my personal beliefs would be I'd rather feel kind of bad for 2 to 5 days than really bad for 3 to 5 weeks. So like, I think risk to reward ratio is in your favor to go ahead and take it whenever you have the chance to take it. But also recognizing people's personal beliefs and, you know, not mandating it at the same time.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's real key, is getting a good understanding of what is the reluctance on the student athlete's part initially, just getting a good understanding of, you know, where they're getting their information from, and you know, is it I'm concerned about the side effects, or I'm concerned that there's going to be a microchip, you know, embedded in me. You know, I get an understanding of that, and then that helps, I think, to address as far as kind of trying to meet them where they're at. Because I you know, get excited about it. I think about the greater good, and then I have to you know, check my values at the door as far as, oh, wait a minute, let's remember, try to understand before I just start spouting off.
Yeah. So kind of having a conversation about where they're at in terms of getting the vaccination itself. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking also about just in terms of the mindset. Let's say they're okay with getting the vaccination, but they're concerned about, they've heard, okay, you know, your energy is going to be low, or, you know, you may not be as focused, as are possible side effects. How would you prepare the athlete for, you know, this competition where they're going to have their second shot, you know, maybe the day before competition or a couple days before competition? You know, what would that kind of preparation look like?
You can remind them that one of Michael Jordan's most legendary performances was his flu game. You know, I forget how many points he scored, but so yeah, I'll use a little humor like that. But I think going back to Cody's point, that if you think about, you know, the greater good of that individual, of their team, of, you know, society, that, okay, there's going to be some downtime now, but in the long run, you're going to be a lot better off, is the point I try to make. So you know,
I would also maybe relate it to a time where they had performed and they weren't feeling their best in the past. Or even, I'm sure the majority of them, by the time that the spring comes around, will have had to have quarantined once, hopefully not, but just recognizing, like, you're at least, we don't want to use at least, but you get to compete. And also reminding them that just because you get the second shot doesn't mean you'll have these symptoms, or doesn't mean it will impact your performance. Maybe you'll surprise yourself. So just preventing that anticipation of not performing at their best, because you don't know till you're, you know, on the court.
I may tell them too, like an analogy of, like, whenever you go to the gym, like, you feel worse leaving the gym, like you've tore muscle fibers, you feel bad, in hopes that you're stronger in a few days. So very similar to the shot, like, you're going to feel bad in hopes that you're stronger against the virus in a few days, weeks.
Yeah, so it sounds like really kind of making them aware of the potential of the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that we're kind of, athletes are, you know, assuming that they're not going to do well, but they don't really know that, you know. And of course, we work with athletes just on their own anxieties in general about not performing well for various reasons, potential reasons, and to stay focused on what to do instead of assuming that they're not going to perform well. Great. So the 2021 Olympics are going to be coming up this summer in Japan. They were scheduled to be last summer, but the COVID pandemic caused that to be rescheduled to this summer. And also, many of the spring sport athletes were given a year to be able to come back because of the COVID pandemic. So they're here, potentially for, a fifth year, or maybe some even a sixth year. And some of them are trying to either qualify for the Olympics or maybe have qualified for the Olympics. So what recommendations would you all give to help the mindset of those athletes who are either trying to qualify or are in the process of training for the Olympics?
I think similar to what we have been talking about, and similar to what they hear from their coaches, control your controllables. Thinking, how do my actions today impact my abilities to qualify and compete in the Olympics? And that's going to be making healthy decisions away from the practice room and the competition and all that. And just remembering how it all fits together, how all these pieces are pieces to their puzzle, and the more healthy ones they can put together, the more clear their path is going to be towards qualification and competing there.
Yeah. And, I'm wondering too, as you talk about that, there may be athletes who are finished with or teammates who are finished in the spring and April, let's say, but the teammate that's going to be performing in the Olympics is still going to be training. Thoughts about that in terms of the challenges of, again, with COVID and interacting with teammates who are done with competition versus them who are still training for the Olympics?
Yeah, I think it's about making smart and healthy decisions, especially like around quarantining and things like that. I still think that the general public isn't aware enough of what it really means to quarantine away from family members or roommates who may have gotten the virus. But if you have a teammate who is now done and now they're living their college life, you have to be smart about how you're going to live with a roommate who may come home one night with be a contract or a contact. So I think that's difficult. I think also making sure they're listening to their trainers and medical advice that they're getting from people that are helping them train, so that they're putting themselves in safe and healthy situations. But yeah, I mean, it's just one other major pandemic of a hurdle that they have to juggle. But for some of them, it's almost like their shot of redemption. So there may be some that missed qualifying last year, and now it's like their second shot because they may not have been able to train for another 4 years for the next games. And so it's almost like redemption. And so now there's more pressure to stay healthy and train and things like that too. There's also athletes that probably like this was like the last time or last year, 2020 was gonna be their last year that they were going to try to do it, and then they're going to retire. And now like, well, do I retire or do I train for one more year and everything that comes in with training hard as an elite athlete for one more year? And so that also impacts like family and life decisions, for those who have partners that they're planning on getting married and starting families or taking that job to start their career. So it's not just about being the elite athlete, but also phase of life stuff that may be put on hold for another year.
Right. Or even athletes who were injured last year and who wouldn't have had a chance to qualify, right? So now they've had a whole year. I can think of one athlete in particular who felt like, his season wasn't as good as he wanted it to be, and he was going to be going to the Olympics. He'd already qualified. His college season wasn't as good as he wanted to be. And so he was actually looking forward to another year of training and being better prepared to go in. So again, the unforeseeable turning into, for him, a positive. Any other thoughts on that about the Olympics?
I think you know, when we hear back and forth about the reality of if the Olympics are still going to happen or not, and there's been a lot of promise that they can, and there's still a lot of time before it actually gets to be July and August. So some of what we've been working on is just, you know, what do you want this Olympic pursuit story to look like for you? And just like you were saying earlier, Matt, that, you know, one competition at a time, one practice at a time. Same here. You know, if there are as many success stories as there are letdowns in athletics, because there's only one gold medal. And so just kind of acknowledging that doesn't mean anyone that didn't medal didn't have a valid, worthy story. And so just giving them that control of their story and what they want to be able to look back and say about their Olympic pursuit, I think has been huge to keep them motivated and hopeful.
Yeah, great point, Kylie. You know, you triggered a thought about, I think it was Ken Ravizza who said, you know, we often say about the athletes who get medals, like, oh, they work so hard for this and they accomplished this goal. But the athletes who didn't get medals also worked very hard for that. They just, you know, maybe were a tenth of a second slower, but it doesn't mean that they didn't work just as hard or even harder, relatively speaking. Okay. Well, let me shift a little bit and get your thoughts on coaches. So we talked a lot about athletes and kind of the team in general. What do you think the spring sport coaches have learned in watching, you know, their peers, the fall sport coaches, kind of go through the fall sports with, you know, cancellations or delays of competitions, again, quarantine of their athletes, having, as you guys alluded to earlier, having to change up and put in new athletes into the lineup. So maybe they didn't have the roster that they wanted. What do you think the spring sport athlete or coach's mindset is? What have they learned, and how do you think that's going to impact their coaching this spring?
I think our coaches here have learned to even trust our medical staff more, because our medical staff, they got together with state officials, state medical staff, and they worked real hard on a plan, and they tweaked the plan, and they got it going along pretty good with their contact tracing and using the resources with the state and the federal government. And they did a very good job of being able to take care of the student athletes, of being able to identify people at risk, of being able to do the contact tracing and get people in quarantine. And so I think our spring coaches are more accepting of it, and maybe I don't think the medical staff had to do as much convincing that, hey, really, this is what we need to do, because they got to see, and so they recognize, all right, yeah, we might not like it, but this is the right way to do things.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, again, learning how to be strategic with it. So learning, deciding what days you're actually doing testing for the team, so that it minimizes how long people are out if they come back positive or not. And then another thing is, one thing I saw like a big shift with the fall sports is there's a certain point to where certain teams would stop sharing who tested positive and when, because that may give advantages to opponents of knowing who's going to be in the game and things like that. So they started kind of withholding how many people were tested positive and things like that until it's actually game day and things like that. So I think similar to injured athletes, there becomes like a strategy of not showing all of your cards so that other people have competitive edges.
So we could call this COVID gate. Is that what? Similar to the Patriots. What was the Patriots called? Bill Belichick and
Something about the ball, the flat ball, or the
Deflate Gate.
Deflate Gate.
Right. COVID Gate 2021. Okay. Any other thoughts on coaches? Yeah, Dana?
I guess just from like a another health and well-being perspective too, I wonder, I mean, I think based on some of my experiences that some of our coaches have been more intentional checking in with mental health as well, like not just with like physical health and COVID protocols and stuff like that, but being more open and available and welcoming of how their athletes are doing. And then just like with an injury, you know, if we need to take a couple days away or whatever we might need to do, being more open to kind of helping our athletes through this difficult time so that they are at their best when they are competing or when they are training.
Yep.
Great point, Dana. I've gotten a lot more, really from a lot more assistant coaches reaching out to me. So oftentimes I've dealt more with the head coaches, but I've had a lot more assistant coaches reaching out. Hey, you know, this group of 3, 4, or 5 student athletes, they're, you know, it seemed like they're struggling. I talked with them. They were, you know, 3rd, 4th day into the quarantine. Would you mind circling back and touching base with them? So that's a great point.
Yeah, and I think with that too, I've also had more coaches reach out for them and their family having problems with stuff too that they typically wouldn't have reached out kind of before the pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's almost, you know, they're living through it too. The coaches are. And so there's a level of empathy and lived experience that everyone is under, and that kind of helps with making decisions for the team, understanding the dynamics and being able to deal appropriately with the experience.
And similar to that too, I think I've had or I've heard of more coaches, not that they didn't do this before, but being even more open, whether it's from like leaders on the team, but like hearing feedback from their actual student athletes too. Like, what do we need? Like, you know, we understand we have to be doing 2-a-days right now or whatever it is, but like, can we have like a structured break and do some kind of team activity together or do something fun at practice today or whatever it is? Like, I think having more open communication with maybe some of the leaders on the team or just other student athletes on the team in general and coaches have been maybe flexible or a little bit more understanding of how can we do things in a creative way to keep everyone motivated, to keep everyone working towards the same goal during a very unique time.
Great points. Let me shift once again before we kind of finish our session here and talk about you all as sports psychologists or sports psychology mental health providers. How do you feel the pandemic has helped or challenged your work with teams or athletes, and what do you feel like you've had to do to adjust successfully?
I've definitely been challenged to embrace technology in a lot more different ways as far as therapeutically. You know, I was used to, you know, a Zoom meeting here and there for, you know, more business, but then starting to use those more, starting to use phone calls more on the therapeutic side. That was a challenge for me because, you know, I'm the old guy bias. I like, you know, people being face to face in the room, things like that. So I think it's been a good challenge for me to think about things in a different way. And I know I've talked with other professionals, you know, across the campus here. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be good moving forward, that there'll be a lot more inclusion of technology in therapeutic means moving forward. And that just gives flexibility to what we can do with a lot more different student athletes at different times, being efficient and be able to provide services. So that's been a good growth edge for me.
Okay. Well, I can just say, Trevor, your sense of humor still comes across very well via Zoom or in person, just from personal experience. So how about the rest of you?
I think one of the challenges has been there's some teams that I haven't been going to practices just because I don't want to risk infecting them. But it's also a team that I'd also kind of need to be present to kind of help building rapport. Yeah. And so that's been challenging when I'm having to reach out to people like, hey, I haven't seen you since orientation, but I just wanted to check in and, you know, see how you're doing. And so I've seen some of the relationship not as strong as it typically is because of that. And so to help with that during rotation, you know, I tell them like, usually you see me at practices now, because I don't want to give you COVID, you're not going to see me at practices, but I'll still be around if you need and things like that too. But that's probably been definitely an impediment to doing the work that we do. On the other side, we've had probably about a 33% increase in utilization rates at pros. And so there's more clients coming in.
Okay.
So at the same time, I'm still seeing more people kind of individually kind of come through than outside of the pandemic too. So it's not a pro that, you know, they're coming in, but it's a pro that there's a resource there and they're actually using that resource. So the other thing too is at the very beginning of the pandemic, making sure we're using our time wisely. And so as a staff, we kind of try to do a lot of kind of more program development. Like, this is stuff we've been wanting to get to for years, but we just haven't had time to. Like, now we have some downtime until stuff happens. And so just trying to use time wisely too.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, with using time wisely, this summer we put together some webinars for our coaches and for our student athletes. Definitely more involvement from coaches since student athletes were all zoomed out, but we were able to do some talks around common mental health conditions that we work with and see that we feel are important for coaches to be educated about, and had really positive feedback on that. And so I think that was a great way for us to connect with coaches, whereas before we're never going to get all those coaches in the same room to talk about those things. But kind of like you were both saying, when it came to trying to meet with teams, putting the whole team on a Zoom to try to do team bonding, it's not the same. It is not the same. And so we're hopeful for now that some of those things are being able to shift and we know how to do that safely, that the dynamic can really change, especially with those spring sports that are finally getting to be together. And one, for me personally, unique thing that I've been having to work on and figure out is the time boundaries in meetings. Whereas in person, you know, oh, you got to walk across campus.
Right.
We've only, you know, this ends earlier, but when they're on their computer, they might keep talking and it's awkward to cut them off. And then it's, you know, 11:59 and you have a noon appointment. And so from the fatigue from the therapist standpoint is just so much harder to hold those time boundaries over the computer than it was with the physical need to leave the office and walk to their classes. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but I never would have guessed.
Yeah, for sure. I think about the same thing, just the challenges of presenting via Zoom to a team. And, you know, so I have this window to be able to demonstrate things. I don't have, like, you know, the whole room to try to express or to show or demonstrate. Yeah, I found it very challenging. And being able to read the team, like how they're responding, because while you can see a bunch of faces on the screen, it's not the same as being in person and you know, noticing, you know, why are they looking down? Maybe because they dropped something, as opposed to, you know, maybe they're not as engaged. On the upside, I think just availability has been really nice for athletes to be able to, again, now they don't have to walk, you know, 15 minutes to get to a session. They can just boom. So accessibility, I think it's opened up accessibility, at least from my experience. You know, confidentiality is a little bit trickier for some athletes. Like, you know, they've, you know, done sessions in their car because they didn't feel comfortable with confidentiality in their room. So that's changed the dynamics, but I think, you know, it's made them feel more comfortable. And in fact, when I asked one athlete, you know, do you want to meet in person? Because we have a room that's large enough to be able to do that with masks on, or Zoom, and they're like, oh, you know, Zoom, it's just, you know, it's easier. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Dana.
Yeah, just one more thing I guess I would add when we're just talking about how did we, I guess, successfully adjust to this. I just think about trying to practice what we preach throughout this whole time too. And we go back to last March, and we were talking about how a lot of what our athletes were experiencing was related to like a loss, right? And the grief and loss process. And I just think about for us too, right? The fact that we had to be like, oh gosh, everything's going to be virtual now. So we had feelings that came up about that. And so how did we let ourselves go through that process, feel those feelings before we settled into that, okay, this is what I have to accept in terms of our new reality, and embrace it. And then when we could kind of do that, I think we were able to maybe understand the drawbacks that came with that, but at the same time, like, how are we creative with our Zoom team sessions or whatever, or finding some of the gratitude when I would have never had like more of an intimate discussion with like a student athlete in their apartment, or seeing their pet or whatever, like some of those cool things that maybe we wouldn't have had in the therapy space. So I guess the shift in our mindset too, a little bit of how do we find those nuggets of positivity when it is different, and trying to, see within our own growth, how we became more creative, how we kind of adapted as best as we could, and how we still had more clients coming in. We still had coaches reaching out to us even when we weren't at practice all the time. So trying to figure out what were we still doing that was helping with that, and how do we move forward from here. So
good point. Cody, were you going to say something or on that, or no?
Nothing important. I was just going to make a joke about you talking about confidentiality, and sometimes they're too okay with it. Where like there's been times where like, okay, is it just us on the phone call? And they're like, yeah. And then like their roommate walks behind them, and it's like, like sometimes they don't care who's around. They're just talking, and like, you might want to get someplace more private so we can have a discussion.
Good point. Yeah. Great. All right. So we have just maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, and so maybe a little speed round. Maybe one thing that you would recommend to, or that you have recommended to your athletes for this upcoming spring semester. What's the most important thing that you think, again, from a sports psych perspective, that could help them?
Staying present. Just things change day to day. Stay present, stay in the moment, get today done, and find 3 great things in each day.
Awesome.
Yeah, the restrictions are going to be where we can't, travel, see family, see friends near as much, things like that. So taking those small times throughout the day, balancing that, being present, being in the moment with taking a moment for yourself, whether that's music, whether that's art, whether that's prayer, meditation, imagery, imagining yourself on the beach. Isn't the same as going to the beach, but it still helps. So, taking those small times, those small mental vacations throughout the day can help.
Great.
I guess similar to Trevor, when you're kind of talking about almost prioritizing self-care moments, right? I would just add to that, still maintaining connection, right? Like, of course, we're connected physically when you're around people, but like meaningful connection, figuring out how you're going to maintain that for yourself and who that's going to be with.
Oh, great. And I'd probably add just to expect adjustments. So anticipate that every week is going to be different. And it's like, what adjustment am I have to make tomorrow? What adjustment am I have to make tomorrow? What adjustment am I have to make tomorrow? So just have that part of the expectations that I'm continuously have to be adjusting to whatever is happening.
Great. And I will just follow it up with, because you've done that before throughout your whole life as an athlete, you've constantly adjusted the changes. Being in the lead, now you're down, being way down, having to come back, not being on your A game, you're being in your C game, having to work through it. Okay, so you have those skills, and sometimes you just need to be reminded that you've done this, and to reach out for support for people who believe in you to be able to do that. All right, guys, I appreciate your time. Great job. Appreciate your knowledge, sharing your experiences. And so again, this is our January Big 12 roundtable discussion, and we'll have another one next month, and look forward to that. You guys have a good week, good month. Till I see y'all again.
Bye.